industrial revolution began.
I think we are at a crossroads.
The similarity between now and 1979 is that the conditions are ripe for quite significant change.
Politics is now debating ideas again from first principles.
OK, it will be revolutionary, transformative.
It's 40 years since the last big post-war political and economic watershed. If we're about to experience another one, as some believe, what will this mean for the world of work?
Everyone is going through changes, and no one knows what's going on.
This Derbyshire town epitomises the agonising growing pains of the world of work in Britain. During the 1984 miners' strike, the colliers of Derbyshire were bitterly divided over whether or not to down tools during the titanic industrial dispute with Margaret Thatcher's government. Miners had to be bussed into the Shirebrook colliery, with the police separating them from hostile pickets made up of their fellow workers.
Nearly 4 decades on, there's no longer a coal mine at the end of this street. Instead, there's a Sports Direct warehouse built on exactly the same site. This is a place that's been described as a neo-Victorian workhouse, a zero-hours gulag. It's become a symbol of what many regard as the fundamental dysfunction of the modern British workplace. So the past and the present of the UK labour market on the same street.
We picketed and we were walking back and they just got me, took me in this van and took me.
Of course, Sports Direct has brought thousands of jobs to town, but one former Shirebrook miner thinks work down the pit, hard and dangerous as it was preferable to toiling in the modern workplace that has been built on top of it.
You know what you're going to get paid, yeah? You know what hours you're going to work, yeah? If you're off work sick, pension scheme, whatever. You know, you signed your contract on day one, and that was it. I used to look at this place as like a mother, you know, and it looked after everybody, you know. And you got to look after mother, you know what I mean? And one of the things we like, we always liked it to be profitable.
Government's 5% policy.
Many agreed that the trade unions were too powerful in the 1970s and that Britain needed radical industrial reform to escape the grip of so-called managed decline.
Here's the cabinet.
Michael Heseltine was one of Margaret Thatcher's original ministers in 1979 and recalls the dominance of the trade unions.
It was job destructive. It was a major force of keeping this country uncompetitive. We looked inwards, we subsidised the industries, and they just didn't look to world markets. The world markets were changing, becoming competitive. We were falling further and further behind.
But did the demolition of the power of organised labour by Mrs Thatcher overshoot? Have bosses, whether in places like Sports Direct or in new digital platforms, been given too much power over ordinary workers? And have successive UK governments been too concerned with the number of jobs rather than their quality and the welfare of workers?
On the surface, the UK jobs economy looks pretty healthy. Employment is at a record high. Joblessness is at its lowest since the mid-1970s. But under the surface, it's a different story. There has been a proliferation of zero-hours contracts. The gig economy is spreading fast, and there's a rising sense that the world of work is not paying like it used to, despite increases in the minimum wage.
Average wages are still below where they were a decade ago, and in-work poverty has exploded. 2 decades ago, most people in poverty were in workless households. Today, the majority of poor people have someone in the family in work. There's a feeling of growing imbalance in the labour market. The number of low-income men working part-time has grown alarmingly over the past 20 years, even as many others crave a healthier work-life balance.
Today we have nearly 4 million people on insecure and low-paid work like bogus self-employment, zero-hours contracts. Well, unions are all in favour of flexibility. You know, many of us have brought up kids and needed flexibility at work. But it has to be a two-way street. And the problem is all the power currently is in the boss's hand and workers don't have a fair voice.
The Labour and Trade
John McDonnell could be the next Chancellor of the Exchequer, charged with delivering this new world of work.
We've got a long hours economy. We work longer hours than the rest of Europe. Low productivity, you know, for German workers and French workers will produce in 4 days what we produce in 5. And I think the change that people are wanting is exactly that. They want a decent income, so that does mean basic levels of pay, you know, a real living wage. It does mean the restoration of trade union rights, the return of sectoral collective bargaining, but also people are actually asking now for more of a say.
The testimony from one Sports Direct warehouse employee, who we have kept anonymous, shows just how little power some UK workers have.
I've got lots of friends that still haven't got contracts. There are many of us who have been working many years for this company and we still haven't got contracts. How can you still call someone a temporary worker after 10 years? No rights, no contract, nothing. We're asking to be treated like humans, like good workers, respect.
Could the lack of bargaining power of ordinary workers actually be holding back the entire economy? Is this one of the reasons our productivity, already well below that of peer economies such as France and Germany, has flatlined since the financial crisis? Jim O'Neill is a former Conservative Treasury Minister appointed by George Osborne.
So if you want to really solve the productivity problem, you might want to, and there's risks with it, but I think it's worth exploring, bringing back a bit more strength to the powers of labour providers relative to the employers, which people of my generation will think, ooh, but I think that's at the core of why we have some of these big problems today, in a huge contrast to 40 years ago.
But others, like the current Chief Secretary to the Treasury, say we should beware assuming state action is the answer.
I think government regulation is important, but it should be simple, it should be transparent. What I'm concerned about is people who say this can all be organised by the government. You know, we can have a committee that decides on which company should be invested in. We will decide the terms and conditions of every person who works in Britain. We'll decide how you run your business. I don't think that's the world people want to live in.
A blanket approach to this isn't likely to be very successful. So I work in the gig economy now as a retired person. I don't need union protection. And to change the law to make it more difficult for employers to recruit me, for example, would be pointless. Young people are those we need to help and find a way through. And I think that there are genuine concerns about the opportunities for young people who are brought into the labour force, essentially at very low wage rates.
So how do we help young workers? Some say we need to think about very radical policies such as a universal basic income, a jobs guarantee, or a 4-day working week. But others say we need entirely new labour market institutions.
Unions are a 19th century innovation in the labour market. What are 21st century ways in which workers are going to organise and collectivise their power? I don't know exactly what it will look like, but I would imagine it will use the technology. It will be a platform in some way. It will be able to connect lots of people who may be in very different places. And I think it will also have to involve delivering skills that people need to have that power in the labour market.
Technological advances, globalisation, and the shifting sands of personal consumer taste. These are the big impersonal forces that have always profoundly influenced what we do at work and how we do it. And they will continue to do so. But perhaps the biggest question over the future of the British workforce is the extent to which our personal choices as workers can also influence that coming world.
Theresa May wanted workers on company boards, but for some the goal should be a more comprehensive form of worker democracy. In London, at a tech startup.
So Abby, you're the boss, right?
No. Don't say that. We're all the boss.
They argue that cooperatives, where the firm is owned and run by its workers, are the future.
thinking about the world of work over, say, the next 50 years, can you actually envisage a world, UK, full of co-ops like you?
It's only building, basically. So we're part of a network which started off with about 23 digital co-ops in the UK, and now it's about 36.
Doesn't it mean a lot of admin, a lot more work? You know, you have to sort of take responsibility, whereas if you perhaps worked in a more traditional environment, you get told what to do, but also you don't have the headaches of being your own boss.
I think it's different work.
It's different, and I think also for me, personally, like the amount of skills that I've learned since working here, I don't think any of us ever come into a meeting or into a decision just like with one hat on. We're constantly wearing lots of different hats because we're the business owners.
I think we've got plenty of evidence to show how it's increased productivity, it's increased well-being, it's increased like a team spirit.
What's striking is how no one who thinks seriously about the future of the world of work believes stasis is even a remote possibility.
If you look at the surveys, there are a very significant number of people who actually like the flexibility of these contracts. And my guess is that tomorrow's world will bring more flexibility.
Okay, it will be revolutionary, transformative, because we're going to change society, and that's what's demanded of us now. I think most people accept that now. And we'll do it by taking people with us, but it will be done on a very pragmatic basis. And that's why I call it is common sense socialism.
We've never had a more capable, informed group of citizens in this country, you know, people who've got access to huge realms of information. And what people want, and you know, I go around the country meeting people, I'm doing a whole range of events around the spending review. People say they want to make the decisions themselves. If people decide to take a sabbatical or want to work different hours or want to work more flexibly, I think we're seeing a huge shift in the economy towards more remote working. I think that's good news actually for towns and cities across Britain.
How do we share the benefits of new technology? We know there are fantastic productivity gains to be made. We know they tot up to millions and billions of pounds. How are we going to share that out? Is it higher pay? Is it a shorter working week? Is it more satisfying work? Let's get rid of boring work. Let's get rid of the drudgery.
It may be too much to ask that work is never boring, but there seems to be an emerging political consensus that work can and should offer greater autonomy for individual workers. But how to get there? Protection, disruption, or revolution?